The sound cut through Montgomery Industries' marble lobby like a blade through silk. 50 people froze mid-conversation, their champagne glasses suspended in air, their business deals forgotten. Richard Sterling's hand was still raised, his knuckles stinging from the force of impact, while Dr. Ava Montgomery's head snapped sideways from the blow that would destroy his life forever. Blood. A single drop of crimson fell from her split lip onto the pristine white marble floor, spreading like spilled wine on expensive linen. The metallic taste filled her mouth, but her dark eyes never left Sterling's face. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't even touch her bleeding lip. She just smiled. Security. Sterling's voice boomed across the lobby, his expensive suit wrinkled from the exertion of striking a woman half his size. Get this piece of trash out of my building before I have her arrested for trespassing. 50 witnesses. 50 people with phones. 50 potential career-ending recordings. But Sterling felt untouchable, drunk on the power that came with running a $2 billion empire. He straightened his tie, that same tie that would be featured on every news channel within the hour, and looked down at Ava like she was dirt on his Italian leather shoes. You people think you can just walk into any building you want, he sneered, his voice carrying the kind of casual cruelty that had terrorized employees for years. Well, not in my company. Not on my watch. The security guard approached slowly, his hands shaking. David Rodriguez had worked this lobby for 15 years, had seen Sterling's rages before, but something about the woman's calm was making his skin crawl with unease. Why wasn't she afraid? Why wasn't she running? Why did she look like she was exactly where she needed to be? Ava wiped the blood from her lip with the back of her hand, never breaking eye contact with Sterling. Her simple gray dress was wrinkled now, her natural hair slightly disheveled from the assault, but she stood straighter than anyone else in that lobby. Straighter than the man who had just struck her. Straighter than the witnesses who were too shocked to move. David, she said quietly, her voice carrying across the marble space like music. The security guard stopped dead, his eyes widening. She knew his name. How did she know his name? Sterling laughed, the sound ugly and sharp. Oh, she knows the help's name. How precious. Maybe you two are friends from the same neighborhood. The racist undertone wasn't lost on anyone within earshot, and several people shifted uncomfortably. But Ava just reached into her designer purse. Yes, designer, though Sterling was too blinded by his prejudice to notice, and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved across the screen with practiced precision. It's time, she whispered into the device. 3 simple words that would bring down an empire. Sterling's laughter died in his throat. Something in her tone, something in the way she held herself, something in the way the older employees were starting to look at her with recognition dawning in their eyes, made his stomach twist with the first hint of fear he'd felt in years. Get her out, he barked at David, but his voice had lost some of its authority. Now. David's hand hovered over his radio, but he couldn't make himself call for backup. Couldn't make himself touch this woman who somehow looked more powerful sitting bloodied on the marble floor than Sterling did standing over her in his $1,000 suit. The elevator chimed. Board members were arriving for the emergency meeting, the one Sterling had been dreading all week. The one that would decide the future of Montgomery Industries. The one that would crown the new CEO. Ava's phone buzzed. A text message that made her smile wider, blood still staining her teeth. Mr. Sterling, she said, rising to her feet with the grace of a queen ascending her throne. We need to talk. Type enough if you're sick of watching bullies destroy good people while the world stays silent. I see you scrolling past injustice every single day, but this story hits different. Don't let this be another moment of cruelty you just witness and forget. Your engagement fights back against every Sterling in this world. The lobby was electric with tension now. 50 people holding their breath. 50 phones pointed at the woman who refused to stay down. 50 witnesses to what would become the most talked about corporate takedown in business history. But Sterling didn't know that yet. He didn't know that the woman bleeding on his marble floor owned that marble floor. He didn't know that every camera recording this moment was capturing evidence that would send him to prison. He didn't know that his entire world was about to collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. He didn't know that he had just slapped the most powerful person in the building. The elevator doors opened again. More board members. More witnesses. More people who would watch Richard Sterling learn the hardest lesson of his privileged life. Ava Montgomery straightened her shoulders, tasted the blood in her mouth, and prepared to reclaim what had always been hers. Because sometimes, justice doesn't wear a cape. Sometimes, it wears a simple gray dress and bleeds on marble floors. Sometimes, it smiles back at the monster and whispers 2 words that change everything. Game over. Hey there, Soul Thread family. I have an offer for you. Every day, your family loses precious stories forever. Your grandmother's wisdom. Your father's struggles. Your children's first words, all fading with time. The Storytelling Prompt Workbook captures these irreplaceable memories with 200+ guided prompts that unlock stories you never knew existed. Only a few copies left. When they're gone, they're gone. Don't let your family's legacy become another forgotten story. Secure your copy now, because some moments can never be recovered. Click the link in the pinned comments to get a copy before we're out of stock. Richard Sterling stood in the aftermath of his violence, breathing heavily like a predator savoring its kill. The metallic taste of power filled his mouth as he surveyed the 50 witnesses, each one frozen in their understanding of what they'd just seen. A black woman had dared enter his domain, and he had reminded everyone who owned this marble palace. His mind raced with the same toxic satisfaction he'd felt 17 other times. 17 other people who'd learned their place in his world. 17 other lessons delivered with his fists, his words, his absolute authority over lesser beings who forgot where they belonged. Clean this up, he barked at the janitor, pointing to the drops of Ava's blood staining his pristine floor. And make sure those recordings disappear. Now. The janitor, Marcus Thompson, nodded quickly but didn't move toward the blood. Something in his 70-year-old eyes flickered with recognition as he stared at the woman still standing defiantly, but Sterling was too drunk on his own power to notice. Sterling straightened his tie, the same designer tie he'd worn during his testimony to Congress about company values just 2 months ago. The irony was lost on him entirely. In his mind, he wasn't a monster. He was a businessman, a protector of order, a guardian of the natural hierarchy that kept the world functioning properly. His phone buzzed. The offshore account alert he'd been dreading. Another $2 million needed to disappear before the quarterly audit, and the board meeting in 15 minutes would determine whether he kept his position long enough to complete the transfer. $57 million stolen over 3 years, hidden in accounts from Switzerland to the Cayman Islands, all dependent on maintaining his grip on Montgomery Industries. The embezzlement had started small. A few thousand here, a contract kickback there. But power was intoxicating, and Sterling discovered that when you controlled the books, the lawyers, and the board members' secrets, you could steal entire fortunes without anyone daring to question you. Sir. David the security guard approached cautiously. What should we do with her? Sterling glanced back at Ava, who still hadn't moved from her position near the elevator bank. She was staring at something on the wall behind his head, and her stillness was starting to make his skin crawl. Why wasn't she crying? Why wasn't she running? Why did she look like she was waiting for something? Get her out of here before I really lose my temper, Sterling snarled. And David, make sure she understands that pressing charges would be unwise for someone in her position. David nodded, but his hands were shaking as he reached for his radio. 15 years of following Sterling's orders, 15 years of watching good people get destroyed by this man's cruelty, and David had never found the courage to say no. The pension, the medical benefits for his diabetic wife, the fear of being another casualty in Sterling's war on decency, all of it kept him compliant. But today felt different. Today, the woman's calm was making everyone nervous, including Sterling himself. Sterling pulled out his phone again, scrolling through his contacts until he found the name he needed. Board member Patricia Hayes, the woman whose gambling debts he'd quietly paid in exchange for her unwavering loyalty. Another puppet in his network of corrupted allies. Hit like if you believe monsters like Sterling should face consequences. Every scroll past this story without engaging tells every workplace bully that their behavior is acceptable. Your like isn't just a click, it's a vote for justice. Are you voting for the victims or staying silent like Sterling's enablers? Patricia, he whispered into the phone, moving away from the crowd. We have a situation. Some troublemaker tried to disrupt the building, and I had to handle it personally. Make sure the board knows I'm protecting company interests. He could hear the uncertainty in Patricia's voice, the first crack in her usual submissive agreement. Richard, what exactly happened? There are already videos circulating on social media. Videos. Sterling's blood pressure spiked. He'd forgotten about the phones, the instant connectivity that could destroy a reputation in minutes. But he'd survived worse scandals. Money could buy silence, lawyers could suppress evidence, and his network of corrupted officials could bury any investigation. Handle it, he commanded. And Patricia, remember who paid for your son's rehab. Remember who kept your little gambling problem out of the newspapers. You owe me. The line went quiet. Another relationship built on fear rather than respect, another person whose dignity he'd purchased with their own weakness. Sterling had perfected the art of finding people's pressure points and squeezing until they broke. Board members with secret addictions, executives with tax problems, employees with immigration issues, everyone had something to lose, and Sterling made sure he knew exactly what that something was. His empire wasn't built on merit or innovation. It was built on fear, blackmail, and the systematic destruction of anyone who dared challenge his authority. 57 employees had quit in the past year rather than endure his toxic leadership. 3 had attempted suicide. 1 had succeeded. But the funeral had been lovely. Sterling had given a beautiful speech about workplace mental health. He scrolled through his messages, finding the latest threat from his money laundering contact in Panama. The operation was getting too big, too obvious, and the international banking regulators were asking questions. If Sterling lost his position as CEO, the entire criminal network would collapse, taking everyone down with it, including Sterling himself. Prison time. Financial ruin. The complete destruction of everything he'd built through violence and corruption. His hands were shaking now as he checked his Swiss account balance. $57 million that could buy him a new identity, a new life in a country without extradition treaties. But only if he could survive the next 20 minutes. Only if the board meeting went exactly as planned. Only if the bloodied woman by the elevator didn't somehow represent the beginning of his end. Sterling looked back at Ava Montgomery one more time, and for the first time in his life, he felt something he'd never experienced before. Fear. Not fear of consequences, he'd always believed himself above those. Fear of the unknown. Fear of the way she was standing. Fear of the text message she'd sent. Fear of the board members arriving early. Fear of the security cameras he couldn't control. Fear that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally chosen the wrong victim. The elevator doors chimed again. More board members. More witnesses. More people who would watch Richard Sterling learn that some people, when you strike them down, don't just stand back up. They take everything you have. Ava Montgomery stood motionless in the marble lobby, her eyes fixed on something that made Sterling's skin crawl with unease. Blood still traced a thin line down her cheek, but her gaze never wavered from the portrait hanging directly behind Sterling's head. A portrait he passed every day but never truly noticed. The portrait of her grandfather, James Montgomery, 1952. The founding father of Montgomery Industries, captured in oil paint with the same unwavering eyes that now stared from his granddaughter's bloodied face. The same strong jaw. The same quiet dignity that had built an empire from nothing more than integrity and a dream to employ good people doing meaningful work. Ava remembered being 7 years old, sitting in this very lobby while her grandfather explained what it meant to build something that mattered. "Wealth without purpose is just fancy poverty, little bird," he'd whispered, using the nickname that made her giggle. "Real power comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down." She'd spent countless afternoons in this building, racing through hallways that smelled like leather and hope, learning about supply chains and profit margins and the sacred responsibility that came with employing thousands of families. Her grandfather had taught her that every decision affected real people: the janitor's ability to pay for his daughter's education, the accountant's chance to buy her first home, the security guard's hope for his wife's medical treatment. In her purse, folded with the precision of someone who understood the weight of legal documents, lay the papers that would change everything. Montgomery family trust documents. Ownership certificates. The inheritance that made her the rightful CEO of the company Sterling had been systematically destroying with his corruption. But she'd walked away from it all 8 years ago. Not because she was weak. Not because she was unprepared. Because she'd seen a documentary about children dying from preventable diseases in rural Ghana, and her grandfather's voice had echoed in her heart: real power comes from lifting others up. The flashback hit her with the force of love remembered. Dust-covered roads winding through villages where hope was harder to find than clean water. Children with eyes too old for their small faces, families torn apart by poverty and disease that money could prevent. Her medical degree, earned summa cum laude from Harvard, suddenly felt like a weapon she was meant to wield in the battle against injustice. Mama Ava! Mama Ava! The voices of 300 children echoed in her memory as she'd walked through the orphanage she'd built with her own inheritance money. Little hands reaching up to hug the woman who'd given them not just shelter and food, but dignity and hope for futures they'd never dared imagine. She'd delivered over 2,000 babies in makeshift clinics, performed emergency surgeries by generator light, trained local nurses who would continue her work long after she'd gone. Her hands, now trembling slightly from Sterling's assault, had pulled children back from death, had held grieving mothers, had built schools that would educate generations. Those same hands had signed the checks that built 17 water wells, each one bringing life to communities that had been forgotten by the world. Her trust fund, worth $47 million, had been transformed into hospitals, schools, and sustainable farming programs that would outlive her own legacy. The children had cried when she'd left 3 days ago. Not just the quiet tears of sadness, but the desperate sobs of people who understood that their angel was returning to a world that might not deserve her. They'd made her promise to come back, and she'd kissed each small forehead with the same gentleness her grandfather had shown her. "Why are you leaving us, Mama?" 8-year-old Kofi had whispered, his small hand clutching her medical coat. "Because sometimes you have to go back and fix the broken things, so more children like you can be saved," she'd whispered back, her heart breaking with the truth of it. Comment, hero, if you believe good people like Ava deserve justice. While you're comfortable at home, she spent 8 years in rural Africa saving lives. The least you can do is spend 2 seconds supporting her story. Don't be like the cowards in that lobby who watched injustice happen. But now, standing in her grandfather's shadow with Sterling's violence still stinging her face, Ava Montgomery was exactly where she'd always been meant to be. Every calculated step of her return had been planned with surgical precision. The simple clothes weren't poverty, they were camouflage. The anonymous entry wasn't weakness, it was strategy. She'd needed to see the cancer that had infected her family's company, needed to witness firsthand how far from her grandfather's values Sterling had dragged the organization. Her phone buzzed quietly. A text from her legal team, positioned 3 blocks away in their downtown office. Temporary restraining order filed. Board meeting postponement request submitted. All documentation ready for immediate filing. Another buzz. Securities Commission has been notified. Federal investigators standing by. Your signal starts everything. Sterling had no idea that 17 of the lobby's security cameras were controlled by a system her grandfather had personally designed, with backup servers that couldn't be erased or corrupted. Every second of his assault had been recorded in multiple locations, automatically uploaded to cloud servers he couldn't touch. The old janitor, Marcus Thompson, caught her eye across the lobby. Recognition dawned slowly in his weathered face, the same recognition she'd seen in her grandfather's longtime employees for the past 3 days as she'd observed the company's operations from coffee shops and public areas. Marcus had worked for Montgomery Industries for 38 years. He'd bounced her on his knee when she was 5 years old, had taught her how to properly clean windows when she'd insisted on helping during summer visits. He'd been at her grandfather's funeral, had wept openly as they'd lowered the man who'd paid for his daughter's college education into the ground. Now Marcus was staring at her with something between disbelief and hope, his hands still refusing to clean the blood Sterling had demanded be erased. Because Marcus understood what Sterling didn't. Some bloodstains can't be cleaned away. And some queens only reveal their crowns when it's time to reclaim their kingdoms. 50 people stood frozen in Montgomery Industries' marble lobby, their collective silence more deafening than any scream. 50 witnesses to Richard Sterling's assault, 50 moral tests happening simultaneously, 50 souls weighing their conscience against their comfort. The psychology of bystander paralysis had taken hold like a disease. Each person looked to others for permission to act, and finding only fear reflected back, they chose the safety of inaction. The same social proof that kept them quiet during Sterling's racist jokes at company parties now kept them motionless as he committed actual violence. Sarah from accounting clutched her coffee cup so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She'd watched Sterling humiliate 3 different employees this month alone, had seen good people quit rather than endure his toxic leadership, had promised herself she'd speak up next time. But her daughter's tuition payment was due next week, and Sterling had a memory like a steel trap for anyone who crossed him. James from marketing was already calculating the cost of intervention. His wife was pregnant with their first child. His mortgage had 15 years left. His mother's medical bills averaged $3,000 monthly. The math of moral courage didn't add up when measured against financial survival. But among the frozen crowd, 3 hearts were beating with something stronger than fear. David Chen had been holding his radio for 47 seconds, his thumb hovering over the emergency button that would bring real security, real help, real consequences for Sterling's actions. 38 years of loyal service to Montgomery Industries. 38 years of watching this building transform from a place of hope into Sterling's personal kingdom of cruelty. David remembered when Ava Montgomery was 12 years old, racing through these same hallways during summer visits, her grandfather chasing behind her with gentle laughter. She'd always stopped to talk to the security guards, had learned everyone's names, had asked about their families with genuine interest that made grown men feel seen and valued. "Mr. David," she'd called out one afternoon, her arms full of cookies her grandmother had baked. "These are for you and Mrs. Chen. Grandfather says you work so hard to keep everyone safe." Now that same little girl stood bloodied in his lobby, and David was choosing between his pension and his soul. His thumb pressed the button. "Security breach in main lobby," he whispered into his radio, his voice shaking with 38 years of suppressed courage. "Requesting immediate backup and emergency medical assistance." Across the lobby, Lisa Rodriguez had made her own choice. The 26-year-old receptionist's phone had been recording for the past 90 seconds, capturing every word of Sterling's racist tirade, every second of his physical assault, every moment of the crowd's complicit silence. Lisa knew the cost of speaking truth to power. Her immigration status was still conditional, her younger brother's scholarship application pending Sterling's personal review. But watching a woman get struck for existing while black in Sterling's world had awakened something in Lisa that was stronger than self-preservation. Her fingers flew across her phone screen, uploading the footage to multiple cloud platforms, sending copies to her personal email, her brother's account, 3 different news outlets, and a dozen social justice organizations. Within minutes, Sterling's violence would be preserved forever, beyond his reach and his lawyer's ability to suppress. But it was Michael Patterson who shocked everyone, including himself. The 29-year-old junior executive had been working 70-hour weeks for 18 months, clawing his way up Sterling's corporate ladder one humiliation at a time. His student loans totaled $87,000. His performance review was scheduled for next week. The promotion he'd sacrificed his relationships, his health, and his integrity to earn was finally within reach. Michael had watched good people get destroyed by Sterling's wrath. He'd seen careers ended with a single phone call, references poisoned, reputations shattered. He'd told himself that surviving Sterling's leadership was just temporary, that he could fix the company's culture once he climbed high enough to matter. But seeing Ava Montgomery's blood on Sterling's marble floor, Michael Patterson remembered why he'd wanted to work at Montgomery Industries in the first place. The company's original mission statement, still hanging in his cubicle: excellence through integrity, success through service, leadership through lifting others up. James Montgomery's words. A man who would have died before striking a woman in his own lobby. "That's enough." Michael's voice cracked the silence like thunder, his designer suit suddenly feeling like armor as he stepped between Sterling and Ava. "Security has been called. Medical assistance is on the way. And this assault has been recorded from multiple angles." Sterling whirled around, his face purple with rage. "You're fired, Patterson. Clear out your desk and get out of my building." "It's not your building," Michael said quietly, his voice gaining strength with each word. "It never was. And everyone in this lobby knows exactly who she is now." Type courage. If you would have spoken up for Ava. It's easy to judge from your couch, but when your job and family depend on staying quiet, would you really risk everything? These witnesses faced an impossible choice. What choice are you making right now by watching this story? The elevator chimed again. This time, board members Patricia Hayes and Robert Chen stepped into the lobby, their faces shifting from confusion to horror as they processed the scene before them. A bloodied woman standing in dignified silence. Their CEO with violence still radiating from his posture. 50 employees watching the moral collapse of everything Montgomery Industries once represented. But most importantly, they saw recognition dawning in the eyes of longtime employees. Marcus the janitor was openly weeping now, his hands pressed to his heart. David Chen was speaking rapidly into his radio while paramedics responded to his call. Lisa Rodriguez was live streaming the aftermath to her social media accounts, where the footage was already being shared hundreds of times per minute. The system Sterling had built on fear and silence was crumbling in real time. Every phone in the lobby was now recording. Every witness was becoming a whistleblower. Every moment of inaction was being replaced by acts of courage that would ripple far beyond this marble prison. Because sometimes, when good people finally find their voices, they discover they were never as alone as they thought. And sometimes, when systems built on cruelty finally break, they break all at once. Patricia Hayes stepped out of the elevator into what she expected to be another routine board meeting. Instead, she walked into a scene that would haunt her conscience forever. 50 employees scattered across the marble lobby like survivors of some natural disaster. A woman with blood on her face standing in defiant silence. And Richard Sterling, her hand-picked CEO, radiating the kind of violence that made her stomach turn. But it was the woman's profile that stopped Patricia's heart. The jawline she'd seen in oil paintings throughout this building for 30 years. The same aristocratic nose that had graced Montgomery Industries' annual reports since 1952. The quiet dignity that had been bred into 3 generations of company leadership. "Dear God," Patricia whispered, her executive briefcase slipping from suddenly nerveless fingers. "Ava." The lobby went dead silent. 50 witnesses held their breath as recognition spread through the crowd like wildfire. The young woman who'd walked into their building as a stranger was transforming before their eyes into something far more dangerous to Sterling's reign of terror. "Ms. Montgomery," Patricia said formally, her voice carrying the weight of legal acknowledgement that made Sterling's blood run cold. We had no idea you were returning today." Ava Montgomery turned slowly to face the board chairwoman, and something fundamental shifted in the lobby's atmosphere. The bloodied victim was disappearing, replaced by the rightful heir to a business empire. Her spine straightened despite her injury. Her chin lifted with the quiet authority of someone who'd never needed to raise her voice to command respect. "Patricia," Ava said simply, her voice carrying across the marble space with the kind of calm that preceded earthquakes. "I trust the board meeting can be postponed while we address this personnel issue." Sterling's face drained of color as understanding crashed over him like a tsunami. The homeless woman he'd just assaulted wasn't some random troublemaker. She was the company's owner. The granddaughter of the man whose portrait had watched every moment of his corruption. The rightful CEO he'd been trying to keep from claiming her inheritance. That's impossible," Sterling stammered, his usual commanding presence crumbling into desperate confusion. "You've been in Africa for 8 years. You abdicated your position. You signed documents." "I signed nothing," Ava interrupted, her voice gaining the steel that had built Montgomery Industries from the ground up. "I delayed my inheritance to serve people who needed me more. But I never abandoned my responsibility to this company or its employees." Marcus the janitor was openly sobbing now, 38 years of watching Sterling's abuse finally validated by the presence of true leadership. "Miss Ava," he whispered, his voice carrying across the silent lobby. "Your grandfather would be so proud of who you became." David Chen, still clutching his radio, felt 38 years of tension leave his shoulders as he realized he'd just called security on the wrong person. The real threat to Montgomery Industries had never been the woman in simple clothes. It had always been the man in the expensive suit who'd turned their workplace into his personal kingdom of cruelty. "Ma'am," David said, his voice shaking with relief and newfound purpose. "Emergency medical is en route. And I've documented everything that happened here." Ava nodded, acknowledging his courage with the kind of respect Sterling had never shown to anyone below his tax bracket. But she didn't need medical attention yet. She needed to reclaim her company from the monster who'd been destroying it from within. "Sterling," she said, her voice now carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who'd spent 8 years making life-or-death decisions in African hospitals. Your employment with Montgomery Industries is terminated, effective immediately. You can't fire me. Sterling exploded, his desperation making him dangerous. I have contracts. I have the board's support. I built this company into what it is today. You nearly destroyed it, Ava corrected, her calm more terrifying than any shouting could have been. And yes, I can fire you. Because despite what you believed, this company never stopped belonging to the Montgomery family. Hit that subscribe button if seeing bullies get exposed gives you chills. Stories like this take weeks of research and writing because I know you need to see that good people can win. But if you don't subscribe, these stories of justice never reach the people who need hope most. Don't let this end with you. Patricia Hayes was already pulling out her phone, speed dialing the company's head of security. We need Sterling's access cards deactivated immediately, she said into the device, her voice steady despite the chaos. All of them. Office, parking, building entry, everything. Sterling reached for his wallet, panic making his movements jerky and desperate. But the plastic cards that had represented his power over thousands of lives suddenly felt as worthless as paper in his trembling hands. You don't understand, he pleaded, his voice cracking as he realized the scope of his downfall. I know things about board members, about their finances. I have protection. You have nothing, Ava said quietly, and the finality in her voice made several employees step back from Sterling as if his failure might be contagious. You lost your protection the moment you laid hands on me in my own building. The elevator chimed again. This time, 3 reporters emerged, cameras ready, drawn by the social media storm that Lisa Rodriguez had unleashed. Sterling's assault was already trending on 4 different platforms, viewed by hundreds of thousands of people who were learning the same lesson Sterling was now facing. Some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. And some people, once awakened to their true power, become forces of nature that no amount of corruption can withstand. Ava Montgomery had returned home, and Richard Sterling's reign of terror was about to end. The marble lobby of Montgomery Industries had witnessed many moments of power over the decades, but nothing compared to the earthquake that began at 2:47 p.m. when Special Agent Maria Santos of the FBI Financial Crimes Unit stepped through the revolving doors. She wasn't alone. Behind her came a parade of federal investigators, forensic accountants, and cybercrime specialists, each one carrying the kind of equipment that turns corporate secrets into criminal evidence. Their badges gleamed under the lobby's crystal chandeliers as they moved with the precision of surgeons preparing to operate on a diseased system. Sterling's face went from pale to gray to the color of old concrete as he watched his worst nightmare materialize before his eyes. The same lobby where he'd felt invincible just hours ago was now crawling with federal agents who'd spent months building an airtight case against him. Richard Sterling, Agent Santos announced, her voice carrying across the marble space with the authority of justice finally arriving. You're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The words hit Sterling like physical blows. His knees buckled as the full scope of his exposure crashed over him. $57 million stolen over 3 years. Phantom companies created to funnel money into his offshore accounts. Falsified contracts that had robbed employee pension funds. International money laundering operations that had caught the attention of banking regulators in 7 countries. This is impossible, Sterling stammered, his usual commanding presence crumbling into desperate panic. I have lawyers. I have connections. You can't just... Your lawyers are currently being questioned about their role in your criminal enterprise, Agent Santos interrupted, pulling out handcuffs that caught the lobby lights like silver lightning. Your connections are cooperating with our investigation to avoid their own federal charges. And your offshore accounts in Switzerland, Panama, and the Cayman Islands were frozen at 6 a.m. this morning." The sound that escaped Sterling's throat wasn't quite human. It was the death rattle of a man watching his empire of corruption collapse in real time. Every bribe he'd paid, every threat he'd made, every life he'd destroyed in service of his greed, all of it was now evidence in a federal case that would put him behind bars for the rest of his natural life. "You don't understand," he pleaded, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "The board members knew. Patricia Hayes took money. David Chen followed my orders. They're all complicit." "Yes, they are," Agent Santos agreed calmly. "And they're all being arrested as we speak. Your entire network of enablers is being dismantled piece by piece." The lobby erupted in whispers as employees processed what they were witnessing. The man who'd terrorized them for years, who'd made their workplace a battlefield of fear and humiliation, was being reduced to a whimpering criminal begging for mercy he'd never shown others. But it was the sound of the handcuffs clicking shut that broke something fundamental in the atmosphere. The metallic snap echoed through the marble space like a gunshot, and suddenly 50 people who'd been paralyzed by fear for years found their voices all at once. It started with Marcus Thompson, the elderly janitor who'd endured decades of Sterling's abuse. His weathered hands came together in slow, deliberate applause that rang through the lobby like church bells. Then Sarah from accounting joined him, her clapping fierce and defiant. Then David Chen, then Lisa Rodriguez, then Michael Patterson. Within seconds, the entire lobby was thundering with applause. 50 people who'd been silenced by Sterling's reign of terror were finally free to express what they'd felt for years. The sound was deafening, cathartic, and absolutely beautiful. Sterling's face twisted with rage as he was led toward the exit in handcuffs. "You're all fired," he screamed over the applause. "Every single one of you. I'll destroy your careers. I'll ruin your lives." But his threats carried no weight now. He was just a criminal in handcuffs being escorted from a building he'd never actually owned, past employees he'd never actually controlled, toward a future he could no longer manipulate. Type justice if this gave you hope that corrupt people eventually pay. Listen, I could stop making these stories tomorrow. They take weeks of research, writing, and production. The only reason I keep going is comments like yours telling me these stories matter. Don't scroll past without letting me know this changed something in you. As Sterling disappeared through the revolving doors, probably forever, the applause gradually faded into something even more powerful, silence filled with possibility. Ava Montgomery stood in the center of the lobby, blood still visible on her split lip, but her posture radiating the kind of quiet strength that had built empires and changed worlds. The victim had become the leader, and everyone in that marble space could feel the shift in the very air they breathed. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying easily through the lobby without needing to be raised. "I know this has been a traumatic day for all of us. But I want you to know that the culture of fear and intimidation that Richard Sterling created dies with his arrest." She paused, looking around at faces that were already beginning to show hope instead of terror. "Tomorrow, we begin rebuilding Montgomery Industries into the company my grandfather envisioned. A place where every person is treated with dignity, where excellence is rewarded, not punished, where speaking truth to power is celebrated, not criminalized." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was pregnant with the promise of transformation. 50 people who'd survived Sterling's toxic leadership were about to discover what it felt like to work for someone who understood that true power comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. As federal agents finished collecting evidence and Sterling's enablers were led away in their own handcuffs, Ava Montgomery began the work of healing a company that had been poisoned by greed and cruelty. The walls hadn't just collapsed around Sterling's criminal empire. They'd collapsed around every barrier that had kept good people from doing great work. And in the rubble of his destruction, something beautiful was about to be born. The marble lobby of Montgomery Industries had become Sterling's personal courtroom, with 50 witnesses serving as both jury and executioners of his reign of terror. But justice, real justice, was only beginning. Within 48 hours, Sterling's carefully constructed empire of corruption crumbled faster than his lawyers could file motions to delay the inevitable. Federal investigators, armed with Lisa Rodriguez's live-streamed evidence and David Chen's security footage, descended on his penthouse office like locusts stripping a field bare. They found everything. $57 million stolen through phantom contracts with companies that existed only on paper. Offshore accounts in 7 countries, each one a testament to his systematic theft from the employees whose lives he'd made miserable. Recorded phone calls where he'd bragged about destroying careers, about making people beg for jobs they'd earned through merit. The most damning evidence came from his own computer, a spreadsheet titled Problem Employees, containing photos and personal information of 17 different people he'd assaulted, humiliated, or driven from the company. Ava Montgomery's name was at the top, with a note that made investigators' blood run cold: "Eliminate permanently, she doesn't know who she is yet." Sterling had planned to have her killed. The realization hit the media like a tsunami. This wasn't just workplace violence. It was attempted murder disguised as corporate restructuring. Sterling hadn't just slapped a woman. He'd tried to eliminate the rightful heir to a billion-dollar company so he could continue stealing from thousands of families. His arrest came at 3:47 a.m., federal agents dragging him from his Manhattan penthouse in handcuffs while news cameras captured every moment of his public humiliation. The same man who'd believed wealth made him untouchable was reduced to begging photographers not to publish pictures of him in orange prison coveralls. His enablers fell like dominoes. Board members who'd accepted bribes, executives who'd buried harassment complaints, HR directors who'd destroyed evidence, each one faced their own reckoning as the investigation exposed the rot Sterling had cultivated throughout Montgomery Industries. Patricia Hayes, the board chairwoman who'd taken Sterling's money to cover her gambling debts, stood before news cameras with tears streaming down her face. "I chose my comfort over other people's safety," she whispered to the world. "I am complicit in every person Richard Sterling hurt, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends." But it was Sterling's own mother who delivered the most devastating blow. Eleanor Sterling, an 83-year-old woman who'd spent decades wondering why her son had become so cruel, appeared on national television with a message that broke hearts across America. "My son is not the boy I raised," she said, her voice shaking with a mother's grief. "Somewhere along the way, money and power poisoned his soul. I failed him as a mother, and he failed all of you as a human being. I'm donating my inheritance to scholarships for children from families he destroyed. It won't bring back their dignity, but maybe it can build hope for the next generation." Sterling received 23 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole. No comfort of wealth to cushion his fall. Just concrete walls, steel bars, and the knowledge that every day for the next 2 decades, he would wake up powerless while the woman he'd tried to destroy built something beautiful from the ashes of his empire. Share this if you believe bullies should face real consequences. Every share sends a message to every Sterling in the world that their behavior has an expiration date. Your share isn't just a click, it's a promise that justice matters. Are you making that promise? 6 months after Sterling's arrest, Montgomery Industries had transformed into something her grandfather would have recognized. A place where dignity mattered more than profit margins, where employees felt safe instead of scared, where diversity wasn't just a slogan painted on conference room walls. Ava Montgomery stood in the same lobby where Sterling had assaulted her, but the space felt completely different now. The cold marble had been warmed with comfortable seating areas where employees could gather and connect. The walls displayed photos of company volunteer work, scholarship recipients, and the hospitals they'd built in Ghana, a continuation of Ava's humanitarian work, now funded by corporate profits instead of personal sacrifice. "Good morning, Ms. Montgomery," called Sarah from accounting, the same woman who'd frozen in terror during Sterling's attack. Now she approached with confidence, carrying a report about their latest initiative: interest-free loans for employees facing medical emergencies. The program had already helped 47 families avoid bankruptcy. Ava smiled, remembering Sarah's paralyzed silence 6 months ago. "Good morning, Sarah. How's your daughter's college application process going?" "She got into pre-med." Sarah beamed. "Full scholarship through the Montgomery Educational Foundation. She wants to work in rural Africa someday, just like you did." The ripple effects of transformation were everywhere. David Chen had been promoted to head of security, implementing protocols that prioritized employee safety over executive comfort. His first action was installing a direct hotline to federal investigators, ensuring that any future Sterling would face immediate consequences for abusing their position. Lisa Rodriguez now headed the company's social justice initiative, using her documentation skills to help other corporations identify and eliminate toxic leadership before it could metastasize. Her live stream of Sterling's assault had become required viewing in business schools across the country, a case study in corporate accountability. Michael Patterson, the junior executive who'd risked his career to intervene, was now vice president of employee advocacy. His job was ensuring that every person who walked through Montgomery Industries' doors felt valued, protected, and heard. The same performance review Sterling had planned to use against him became Michael's roadmap for promoting courage over compliance. But the most profound transformation was in Marcus Thompson, the elderly janitor who'd witnessed decades of Sterling's cruelty. Ava had created a position specifically for him: Director of Institutional Memory. His job was sharing the company's true values with new employees, making sure James Montgomery's original vision lived in every decision they made. "Miss Ava," Marcus said, approaching with his usual gentle smile, "the new employee orientation starts in 10 minutes. They're eager to hear about our founder's principles." "Thank you, Marcus," Ava replied, her voice carrying the same warmth her grandfather had shown to every person who worked for him. "Make sure they understand, we don't just employ people here. We invest in human dignity." The financial results spoke louder than any motivational poster. Employee retention had increased by 340%. Productivity was up 67%. Customer satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs as workers who felt respected began treating clients with the same dignity they experienced at work. But more importantly, Montgomery Industries had become a beacon for corporate responsibility. Other companies were copying their policies, their employee protection programs, their commitment to lifting up rather than tearing down. Ava's leadership style, quiet strength combined with fierce protection of the vulnerable, was being studied in MBA programs as a model for sustainable success. Comment: transformation. If you believe good leadership can heal broken systems. While you're watching from comfort, these employees rebuilt their workplace from toxic wasteland to healing sanctuary. The least you can do is acknowledge their courage. Don't scroll past, be part of the solution. 1 year after Richard Sterling's assault, Ava Montgomery stood before the United Nations General Assembly, addressing world leaders about corporate accountability and the responsibility of power. The same woman who'd been bloodied in her own lobby was now setting global standards for workplace dignity. "Power without compassion is just sophisticated cruelty," she told the Assembly, her voice carrying to millions of viewers worldwide. Every leader, every CEO, every person with authority over others, faces the same choice every day: lift people up or tear them down. The choice you make defines not just your legacy, but the world your children inherit. The Montgomery Industries model had spread across 6 continents. Companies were implementing sterling prevention protocols, early warning systems designed to identify toxic leadership before it could cause harm. Business schools required ethics courses based on Ava's transformation of her grandfather's company. Federal legislation mandated whistleblower protections that made it safe for employees to report abuse. But the most powerful change was personal. Every person who'd witnessed Sterling's violence had found their own path to courage. David Chen started a non-profit helping security workers recognize and report workplace abuse. Lisa Rodriguez launched a digital platform connecting victims of corporate bullying with legal resources and emotional support. Michael Patterson wrote a best-selling book about finding moral courage in corporate environments, with proceeds funding scholarships for first-generation college students. Even Patricia Hayes, the former board chairwoman who'd enabled Sterling's behavior, dedicated her remaining years to victim advocacy. Her foundation helped over 3,000 workplace abuse survivors rebuild their careers and their confidence. The statistics told an incredible story. Workplace violence reports were down 23% nationwide as companies implemented Montgomery-style accountability measures. Employee satisfaction surveys showed record highs across industries that had adopted Ava's leadership principles. Mental health resources in corporate settings had expanded dramatically as businesses realized that protecting employee well-being wasn't just morally right, it was profitable. Sterling himself had become a cautionary tale taught in every business ethics course in America. Prison had broken his arrogance but not his bitterness. He spent his days writing angry letters to newspapers, claiming he was a victim of corporate politics rather than a perpetrator of systematic abuse. No one published them. His financial empire had been dismantled piece by piece, every stolen dollar returned to the pension funds and employee benefits he'd plundered. The families he'd tried to destroy were now thriving, their children attending colleges paid for by restitution funds, their medical bills covered by Sterling's seized assets. Subscribe if you believe stories like this should be told. Every person who subscribes is voting for more content showing that dignity and respect matter. Your subscription isn't just a number, it's proof that people still care about justice. Are you someone who cares? Show me by hitting that button. But perhaps the most meaningful legacy was happening in a small village in Ghana, where 300 children attended the Ava Montgomery Educational Complex, a school funded by her company's profits and built by employees who volunteered their time. The children who'd once called her Mama Ava were now teenagers, many preparing for medical school, inspired by her example of using privilege to serve others. One of those students, 16-year-old Kofi Asante, had written her a letter that she kept framed in her office. Mama Ava, you taught us that power is not about what you can take from others, but what you can give. When I become a doctor, I will remember that healing broken hearts is just as important as healing broken bones. Ava had learned that justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, it's about creating systems where goodness can flourish, where employees feel safe to speak truth to power, where leaders understand that their authority is a responsibility, not a right, where dignity isn't negotiable, regardless of someone's position on the corporate hierarchy. If Ava's story inspired you, remember, you have power even when you feel powerless. Your dignity cannot be taken, only temporarily hidden. Stand tall, speak truth, and never let bullies define your worth. You are stronger than you know. The marble lobby of Montgomery Industries still bore a small mark where Ava's blood had stained the floor. She'd chosen to leave it there, not as a reminder of trauma, but as a testament to transformation. A symbol that even the deepest wounds can heal when treated with justice, compassion, and the unwavering belief that every person deserves to be treated with dignity. Some stories end with revenge. Others end with justice. But the best stories, the ones that changed the world, end with hope. And Ava Montgomery's story was far from over. If this story moved you, there's something urgent I need to share. Every day, precious memories and family stories disappear forever because we keep saying, "I'll write them down someday." The storytelling prompt workbook I mentioned is designed specifically to capture these vanishing treasures, but like the memories themselves, this opportunity won't last forever. Don't let your family's history become another sterling casualty, a story that should have been preserved but got lost in the chaos of daily life. Time is the one thing we can't get back, and neither are the stories of the people we love.